Sarah Mitchell stared at the stack of cardboard boxes in the center of her living room. This was the 5th time in 7 years she had packed her entire life into tape and plastic. The air in the room felt stagnant, heavy with the dust of folded memories and unmade decisions. Outside, a moving truck idled in the driveway. The low, rhythmic vibration of the diesel engine traveled through the floorboards and into the soles of her feet, an insistent reminder that time was running out. She looked at the silence of the empty corners where furniture used to sit. The house felt hollow, stripped of the life she had tried to build here. She grabbed a marker from the floor and pressed the tip against a fresh box. She paused, the weight of the cardboard pressing back against her palm. She wrote the word kitchen in thick black letters, the sound of the marker scratching against the surface echoing in the quiet. This was the cycle. The boxes were the only constant in her life. She stood up, her legs stiff from hours of kneeling, and turned toward the next pile. There was no room left for anything else. Sarah dropped the marker, the plastic casing clattering against the hardwood. The packing tape lost its hold on the box, curling back with a dry, snapping sound. She leaned against the wall, eyes fixed on the empty space where her desk had stood just hours before. The memory of the last interview surfaced, sharp and unwanted. The hiring manager had scanned her resume, his gaze lingering on the frequent gaps, his pen tapping a rhythmic, dismissive beat on the tabletop. He leaned forward, the question already rehearsed. How long will you actually be in the area? He did not wait for her to finish her sentence. He had already checked the box that meant rejection. She had recited the same script 5 times in 7 years, each attempt ending with the same polite, hollow smile from an employer who saw her only as a temporary liability. She watched the dust motes dance in the light streaming through the bare window. Her professional life was a series of beginnings that never reached a middle. She was a nomad in her own career, always packing, always leaving, always proving her worth to people who viewed her presence as a countdown. The realization sat heavy in her chest. She was tired of explaining her life to people who were only looking for reasons to say no. Sarah knelt by a half-sealed container, her fingers brushing against the worn edges of a book buried deep in the cardboard. She pulled it out. The cover was faded, the spine cracked from years of travel. She flipped through the pages until the paper stopped at a familiar dog-eared corner. Her eyes traced the ink. Every adversity carries the seed of an equal opportunity. She read it twice. The words did not stop the rain drumming against the window, but they pulled her focus away from the empty walls. She turned toward her desk, currently a chaotic landscape of folders and loose sheets. She had spent months scribbling notes on how to navigate military housing, school transfers, and the labyrinth of local paperwork that greeted them at every new base. She had viewed these papers as proof of her displacement. Now, looking at the mountain of data, she saw something else. She pushed the packing tape aside and cleared a space on the wood. She grabbed a stack of folders, lining them up by topic. The frustration that had fueled her morning began to sharpen into a precise, cold clarity. She pulled her laptop from the last open bag, plugged it in, and stared at the blinking cursor. She did not see a move. She saw a system waiting to be built. Sarah typed the final line of code and clicked Publish. Relocation support for military families appeared on the screen, a simple, stark header against the white background. She waited. She checked the dashboard every 10 minutes, then every hour, but the visitor count remained at 0. The silence of the room felt heavy, pressing against her ears as the days dragged into a week. Doubt crept in, whispering that she was just building a digital ghost town. Then, on a Tuesday, the notification sound sliced through the quiet. One email. A family, desperate for help with a school district transfer, needed answers. Sarah did not hesitate. She spent 3 days deep in state laws and local contacts, cross-referencing every regulation until her eyes burned. She compiled a 10-page guide, polished and precise, and hit send. 2 hours later, a notification pinged again. A transfer notification, $50. The currency was not just money, it was evidence. She stared at the screen, the numbers shifting from 0 to 50, and felt the weight of her doubt evaporate. The silence in the room no longer felt like emptiness. It felt like space for something to grow. Sarah treated the business like a military operation, stripping away the mess of her previous life to build a rigid, repeatable structure. She spent her days listening, but her nights were for construction. When families emailed her about the crushing stress of moving, she did not just offer sympathy. She saw a gap. She opened a blank document, labeled it Checklist, and began to break down the chaos of a transition into linear, manageable steps. She mapped the flow of paperwork, school registrations, and housing applications across her wall with sticky notes, connecting them into a web of logic. Her desk lamp became the only light in the house, casting long, sharp shadows across the floor. She typed until her fingers ached, converting raw human frustration into clean, digital templates. Every time a family struggled, she built a tool to solve it. The house remained silent, the world outside asleep, but her screen was a hive of activity. She was not just helping one family anymore. She was architecting a solution for thousands. The coffee went cold, the clock ticked past 3, and the stack of templates grew, a fortress of order built in the quiet of the night. Sarah carried her laptop into the city, prepared to scale. She sat in a glass-walled conference room, clicking through charts that tracked thousands of military families. The air was cold, scented with expensive coffee. The investors did not look at the families. They looked at the market cap. One by one, they pushed their chairs back. "Your niche is too small, Sarah," they said. "The military market is fragmented. It is not worth the infrastructure." They spoke in terms of acquisitions and exit strategies, ignoring the human cost of the transitions she was solving. Sarah watched them. Their rejection was sharp, a sudden strike to the progress she had fought so hard to build. She walked out of the building and onto the sidewalk, the city noise crashing around her. Her hands felt hollow. She checked her inbox. Another email from a mother in a new state, asking for a checklist. She stood there, the rejection of the high-rise fading behind her. She had a choice. She could pivot to please the suits, or she could trust the data in her own inbox. She walked to the nearest cafe, opened her laptop, and ignored the investors. She started building the next template for the family that actually needed it. The cafe table was cluttered with half-empty cups and printouts of school district codes. Sarah ignored the ambient hum of the room, focusing entirely on the cursor blinking on her screen. She was refining a new relocation module when a notification pinged sharp and persistent. It was not a help request from a family. It was an official inquiry from a major military organization. She read the subject line twice. A formal partnership proposal. The screen glowed, illuminating her face in the dim light of the late afternoon. She scrolled through the terms. They were not asking for a niche solution. They were asking to integrate her entire system into their national network. The weight of the last 5 years of struggle condensed into a single moment. Her finger hovered over the trackpad. The room seemed to expand, the noise of the cafe fading into a dull, distant murmur. She clicked Accept. The page refreshed instantly, replacing her simple dashboard with a complex, multi-tiered interface. The project was no longer just her own. It was a massive, validated force. She leaned back, the screen light reflecting in her eyes, and watched as the data streams began to populate in real time, signaling the end of her solitary fight. The inbox overflowed within hours. Sarah could no longer handle the individual requests manually. She hired her first employee, then 3 more, training them with the precision of a military drill. The chaotic kitchen table gave way to a structured workspace. She applied the principle of building assets, creating automated sequences that handled routing, paperwork, and logistics without her direct input. The business began to run like a clock. When a new family logged in, the system triggered a customized relocation packet, populated with state-specific data, and scheduled local contacts automatically. She spent her days refining the architecture rather than answering every email. The growth turned vertical. Graphs on her monitors climbed in sharp, steep lines. She moved from a desk of scattered notes to a command center of real-time analytics. Problems that once took days to solve were now handled by code in seconds. She watched the systems function, humming with efficiency. The frantic pace of her past life was replaced by a calculated, scalable momentum. Sarah stood back, monitoring the dashboards, seeing the machine she built finally outpace the demands that once kept her trapped. 5 years had passed. Sarah sat in a quiet, glass-walled office that overlooked a city she had only moved to 3 months ago. The view was expansive, but her focus remained on the monitor. She moved her mouse, clicking into the primary financial dashboard. The numbers on the screen were static for a second before the page refreshed. She leaned forward, eyes scanning the columns of data. The total revenue figure hit the seven-figure mark. She stared at the digits. The math was precise. It was not just a profit margin. It was the cumulative result of every relocation, every frantic packing session, and every unanswered question she had once faced alone. The silence in the office was absolute, a stark contrast to the noise of her early days. She traced the edge of the screen, realizing the irony of her trajectory. The nomadic life that had once felt like a cage had provided the exact blueprint for the software that now sustained her. She had turned the instability of military movement into a predictable, scalable system. Her hand rested on the desk. She looked at the city below, then back at the dashboard. The obstacle had not just been a hurdle, it had been the architecture of her freedom. A knock at the door broke the silence. A young military spouse entered, her eyes darting toward the desk where a stack of folders sat, mirroring the boxes Sarah had once stared at in her own living room. The woman sat down, gripped her hands together, and asked, "How do you do it? How do you keep moving without losing everything?" Sarah did not answer with platitudes. She slid a thick, organized binder across the mahogany desk. It was the distillation of every mistake she had made and every solution she had built. "I stopped fighting the change," Sarah said. "I started building around it." The woman opened the binder, scanning the tabs and checklists. Sarah stood, the weight of her past instability finally replaced by the calm of a proven process. She looked out the window at the city, then turned back to her guest. "The obstacle is the path." Sarah tapped the top of her laptop, closing it. The screen went dark, reflecting the room full of systems that would run regardless of where she lived next. She walked toward the door, ready for the next client waiting in the lobby, no longer a victim of the map, but the architect of her own movement.